Now I want to go to the one member on our team up here that might actually have the intellectual firepower to stay with your team down there, Dr. Collins. Recognize Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for coming and appearing. First, I'm just going to start with a rhetorical question first. Since the last time before this committee, you probably know my wife passed away from heart disease 3 days before her 58th birthday. As you also know, the NIH and in general, we've really underfunded research into heart disease on women over the years. So I went back and looked at the chart of, what by disease breakdown, what the NIH spends on. 84 million Americans have heart disease, and yet the amount we spend per death is 100 times less on heart disease than it is on HIV/AIDS. 100 times less per death. That kind of discrepancy just needs to be justified, and it's just going to be a rhetorical question. I mean, it is stunning what that discrepancy is, and how the fact that we dedicate as little as we do to heart disease, the most prevalent disease in the country, how that will affect the population. Anyway, rhetorical question on that one. Dr. Volkow, I'm going to ask you a question about drug use. There's obviously ongoing discussion about legalizing a dangerous addictive drug called marijuana. Some people may not think it's dangerous or addictive. It is dangerous or addictive. It affects the human brain, including memory, motivation, a lot of things that are probably not good for people, especially our youth. Do you know what the economic impact of marijuana use is, including its effect on workforce preparedness, on education? Do we have these answers? Are these important things to study, and do you have the resources to study these things before we go willy-nilly into just legalizing a dangerous addictive drug?
Dr. Harris, thanks very much for your question. And indeed, there's been many studies that have evaluated specifically the consequences of use of marijuana among teenagers vis-a-vis their educational achievement. And they have consistently shown that it actually decreases, if you are smoking marijuana in adolescence, it decreases the likelihood that you will finish school and that you will get a degree. With respect to what is the impact in the workforce, the data there is much less clear. The studies have not been done as extensively as for education. We know in general that the use of drugs in the workforce is responsible for 30% less productivity on an individual that takes drugs, but that has not been distinguished with respect to whether it's marijuana or cocaine or methamphetamine. So we really do not have a precise number there.
Sure. And just as a very quick follow-up, you'd imagine that since marijuana actually affects motivation, something that might be important when you go to work, you'd imagine it might actually have quite an influence on workforce, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would predict so, and what is shown is the contributions of the decrease in productivity are absenteeism, not showing, but when you are there, presenteeism, you are there, but you are not really working. And the same, the lack of motivation may account for the very poor outcomes in education.
And we should probably answer these questions before we go on. I mean, we should expect scientific answers, I imagine.
I completely agree.
Question. Dr. Collins, let me follow up with you again about some things that are being said about internationally what's going on and what's going on in our biomedical workforce. Again, 50,000-foot view, because, I think you actually sent you sent something around where your article in JAMA, I guess in January of this year, suggesting that perhaps, China, will actually overcome the United States in 2022, which, yeah, I guess if you look statistically and you assume, exponential growth continuing, things like that. But what's interesting is the growth in China is actually in the private investment, the industry investment. There's a little bit of growth in the public investment, but the real growth's in the private industry. And as you also noted, one worrisome trend in the United States is that the industry investment in biomedical has gone down. That's not your, that's not where you have the ability to directly impact. Maybe you don't. But I think that that's an important key in this that we're not talking about. And, there are certain policies that do impact that. For instance, we're undergoing a TPP negotiation where patent protection of American manufactured biologics actually will be hindered. That doesn't help our biomedical industry here. When we're negotiating a trade treaty that actually will hurt our biomedical industry because of the nature of biologics. What's the strategy because we can go on ad infinitum. You know, one interesting thing is, you know, the administration, in spending $35 billion additional dollars we don't have on non-discretionary spending, decided to send only $1 billion to the NIH, only a 3% increase. I think that's a drop in the bucket if we don't get the picture of the larger picture of the entire biomedical research effort in the United States. So what can we do, or what can you do at the NIH to implement a strategy where we can promote industry investment? So you have partners in industry, so we're leveraging NIH dollars, greatly leveraging them, as it appears China is doing.
Again, to be fair, try to be brief, and I would remind the questioners, let's not jam them right up against the end of the time and then leave them hanging. That's a tough position to put our guests in.
Well, very quickly, I agree that we have a responsibility and an opportunity to bring together the public and the private sector investments in biomedical research like never before. One example is this Accelerated Medicines Partnership that I spent 3 years working with a number of heads of R&D in big pharmaceutical companies, particularly Michael Dolston at Pfizer, to put together, and which is now, with shared expenses being covered 50-50 by the private and public sectors, doing something never attempted before for Alzheimer's disease, for diabetes, for rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, putting the scientists around the same table, designing the experiments, holding themselves accountable with milestones, and making all the data accessible to others who might have good ideas about it. This is unprecedented, what AMP is trying to do. We're 1 year into this. We're ahead of schedule. I'm looking for all those opportunities that I can find where those traditional firewalls that sort of got in the way of making progress weren't really making any sense. We have to be clear about conflicts of interest, and we are, but that shouldn't be a reason not to think about creative endeavors that fly in the face of such great opportunities that we now see in front of us.